Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman. This is another episode of Weststock Online. We're up in the 120 episode numbers now, and it's pretty amazing to think we've been doing it now for almost 5 years. But our guest today has been doing his online documentary, forum, blog, news, info, production, distribution, everything that has to do with documentary for more than 20 years, and we're going to meet our guest in just a minute. But I want to remind you that we're brought to you in part by Real Screen. Real Screen Summit is coming up in Dana Point, California, June 6th through 9th. If you're in the business, want to be in the business, think you're in the business, you should go to our Weststock Online. In the bottom, there's a Real Screen icon, and you click on it and you get all the information about how to register for Real Screen Summit. I go there every year. I'll be there this year. I look forward to seeing you there. So our guest today is Mr. Doug Block. Doug, hi, how are you?
Hi, Chuck.
I always ask my guests, where are you? What city are you in? Even though I know the answer, I'm going to ask.
I am in New York City, balmy New York City. I have to go up to 70 today, and it's still early enough in the day that I'm sipping my morning coffee.
What part of the city are you in? If you want to say geographically.
I live in Stuyvesant Town, which is near the East River, and work in my office is at Union Square.
I didn't know that. So you get on the subway and go down to Union Square?
No, it's a nice walk due west. It's like about a 1.5 mile walk.
Oh, wow.
That's where I get my bulk of my exercise.
So what do you call the D word in a 1 or 2 word description? What is the D word?
I just call it an online community for documentary professionals worldwide. And we aren't really a blog. We started as a blog. I mean, I started as a blog back in '96 while I was making this film called Homepage, where I followed this group of people who were like internet pioneers back when blogging was first taking off. And I followed what turned out to be, it's kind of acknowledged as the web's first kind of superstar blogger, Justin Hall, who was a 20-year-old college student at Swarthmore. And he was always proselytizing for creating your own blogs. At that point, they were called homepages, which is why, the film was called Homepage. And one day I followed him to his tech lab, his media lab, and we were on computers, and he was teaching me how easy HTML is. His catch-all phrase is HTML is easy as hell. And so I, there's a scene in the film actually where you see me plotting my way into creating a page, and right there on the spot I called it the D word, because documentaries, have always, it's kind of the catch-all phrase that distributors used for years when talking about documentaries. It's the D word, it's they're not popular. They're kind of a lower form of filmmaking.
In the past, you should speak in the past tense, I think.
Yeah,
now.
I mean,
right?
yeah. So
let me interrupt you because
Sure.
I want to. First of all, I'd like to know what happened to that film of yours, the Homepage. Where did it end up?
It ended up doing well. HBO came on board, as did a number of other broadcasters, and that sort of became, was the beginning of my relationship with HBO. They partially financed my next 3 films as well.
Which I want to talk about too. So,
Okay.
Because in doing my research on you, Mr. Block.
Oh my God! All right, yeah.
Even though I've known you off and on for, I don't know, 20 plus years, undoubtedly, maybe more. I went back and watched 2 of your renowned films. The first one, of course, was 51 Birch Street, and I watched 112 Weddings. But let's talk about 51 Birch Street. I got to tell you, the film is terrific. It holds up. I'm amazed at, first of all, how well it looks on. I watched it on my computer through Canopy, Actually, that's not true. I think I bought it through Amazon Prime because I couldn't log into Canopy for some reason. And knowing that you shot this how many years ago before HD, it still looked fantastic. And as a film, it's really an emotional, terrific documentary film ride that you put together there. And it must have been, obviously it was an emotional roller coaster for you, right?
Oh my God, drove me right back into therapy.
Well, I was thinking how therapeutic the making of the film must have been, right?
It was and it wasn't. I mean, for those who haven't seen the film, it's in brief. My parents had a 54-year marriage that, my sisters and I all thought was a pretty good one. And then my mother died suddenly and unexpectedly. We're still not quite sure what the cause was, but a virus of some sort. And 3 months later, my father called me from Florida to announce he was moving in with his secretary from 40 years before, which, needless to say, was a shocker and made us all wonder. They married and sold the family home that we all grew up in. This is a film about families and how things are never quite what they appear to be.
Okay. He's lighting my fire.
Like when my mother died unexpectedly. And 3 months later, my father reconnected with his secretary from 40 years ago.
I remember being struck with the wedding when they held that kiss. I think I timed it at 12 seconds, which is about 11 seconds longer than I remember Dad ever kissing Mom.
I came there with my camera 2 weeks before the movers came, thinking I'll just get some shots of the house, to remember the house by. But the minute I walked in the door with the camera, I just, like, the emotions overwhelmed me, of seeing everything I grew up, all the bric-a-brac and artifacts and memories being packed away or thrown away. And I started to talk to my father. I popped a question to him and he kept talking. He's not one to talk. And I realized that that the move was, creating some sort of opening for him to talk about my mother in a way he'd never talked about before. And then I discovered 3 boxes of my mother's diaries, going all the way back to that time 40 years ago when this woman, Kitty, worked for my father. Every family has its secrets, including mine.
Do you think my mother would have wanted me to know what was in her diaries?
And I still didn't think it was a film. I came back 2 days later thinking my father's just, interested in talking, and I'll just, see where that leads. The camera seemed to be facilitating the conversation. And I asked him whether he missed Mom.
No, I can't say I miss her.
In that moment, I just went from thinking I'm just gathering, some footage for posterity for my family to thinking there's a film here. I'd also interviewed my mother before she died, way back for these family history interviews I did with both parents. So I realized I had my mother's side of the story as well. And I knew I had an ending. I mean, immediately in my mind, I realized that the moment that when they leave the house, that's going to be the end of the film. So I was trying to tell the story of our family and their marriage, and what unfolded, and my coming to understand my parents and all of their complexity without losing the love that I felt for both of them.
So, I mean, this is a weird question, but it hadn't occurred to me until just now. I watched 112 Weddings last night. Again, I'd seen it when it first came out, but it was like watching it for the first time again. Do you think if your parents in their youth before they got married had been able to watch 112 weddings, do you think they would have still gotten married?
I don't know.
And I say that, as a positive to the film, because I think what you don't say in the film, or what should be said at the film, is like every couple that's engaged or thinking about getting married should watch that film, 112. Well, I think they should watch both films.
Yeah. The rabbi who's
112.
The rabbi who's in the film had told me afterwards that, he does marriage counseling in a way for all the couples that come in, that he's going to officiate their weddings, that he has at least 2 sessions with them, and he asks them a bunch of questions. And he says he wishes he had DVDs that he could hand out to each of the couples as they're before they have tie the knot. So, but to answer your question, it's interesting you asked that. But I guess you're asking whether I was if my parents had seen 112 weddings, would they have gotten married? It was a different time.
It's like being granted a front row view as an ordinary couple experiences the most extraordinary day of their lives.
To be sensitive at all times to each other's needs.
I think the message that comes through from Birch Street is, and you asked, I think it was Natasha, your friend of your mom, who said, nobody got divorced back then. And she said she had to think of her girlfriends that were divorced, and there were very few, right? Our parents' generation just didn't get divorced, and therefore, they stayed together. And
yeah. It's one of it's not giving away the film to say that the closing line of 51 Birch Street is a memory of my mother at an anniversary party they're having in our backyard, and she asked me. I go, happy anniversary. She goes, yeah, aren't you glad we got married?
Right.
Which is like, the ultimate impossible question to answer when that they had an unhappy marriage, but you're the result.
But I don't think, I hope you're wrong. I don't think your parents' marriage was totally unhappy. No. I think they grew apart over the years, it seemed, obviously. They both seemed like nice people. There are a lot of other documentaries out there where the couples are a lot crazier and treat each other poorly. And, the funniest, most incredible moment in 112 Weddings, I don't want to give away the punchline, but there is a moment that's very funny that would work in a scripted film. You can't believe that this guy said what he said, that the guy with the curly hair, right? Mm-hmm. And he was a wonderful character, and he just went on. Should I give it away?
Sure, go ahead.
He sits there. I mean, the opening part is shocking. He said, "My wife was horrible. She didn't do anything right from the very beginning, and she got addicted, and she was on pills, and she was committed, and she was a terrible wife." And then he looks right at camera. He says, "Oh no, wait, that was me." Which is, the guy obviously had a very good sense of humor and was funny, and it was an amazing moment that spontaneously, maybe he does that at parties, I don't know, but he was wonderful.
Yeah, with documentaries. The term "stranger than fiction" is a wonderful one to define documentaries. It's just, you can't make up.
And nowadays, I would say another term you might define with a lot of high-end documentaries is better than fiction, because it's hard to the top 10 films. Do you realize the top 10 grossing films in this last year were all franchise or comic book or number 3 version of the same crappy film? And why the 20-year-old movie-going audience wants to see, version number 6 of Batman or whatever is beyond me. When when there's so many good films. And I you know, doing this webcast that I do, I get to see now a lot of films, and I'm just amazed at how wonderful they are. And going back and watching your films that, you know, 20 years old, you know, I'm sure I enjoyed, and I say that word loosely, you know, because they're both very emotional films. 112 Weddings, which is mostly a very upbeat and positive love affair with weddings and how wonderful they are and all that. And then you have these characters who talk about, you know, getting divorced and how her husband cheated on her and she didn't know, and how shocking it was. So it makes you really think about your life and what's going on.
I'm going to devote the rest of my life to you. That's kind of insane.
And I want to congratulate you, even though, you know, these are older films, but they really hold up. And I think, you know, I think they're going to be around and, you know, for a while in many ways. And I'm glad that they're available. So, and I'll just say, you know, both of them are available on Canopy. Kanopy, which is a terrific.
Yeah, Amazon Prime is 51 Birch Street, and iTunes as well. And I don't know; it's hard to keep track of where all these things wind up. What
Well,
platforms
hopefully,
they wind up.
you know, you could keep track by going to the mailbox and getting a check occasionally, right?
You'd like to think, yeah. No, the royalties from 51 Birch Street keep coming in, which is great.
And is that just from Amazon and
Mostly Amazon
and Canopy?
Somehow people find it. I don't know how. They never report, of course. I mean, you get statistics of where it's coming from, but I have no idea. At one point, I have no idea why they're finding it. Like, we're not advertising it, and
Do you have a
at some point
website
during
for
the
51 Birch Street?
At some point during the pandemic, somebody told me, by the way, do you know you're in the top 10 of Amazon documentaries?
Really?
You know, of stream. I mean, I noticed the royalties were better for that quarter, but I mean, I don't know why. I was wondering, like, did somebody, did Madonna like tweet about it or something? I don't know. I have no idea why. People discovered it, and I think it's one of those films when people see, they recommend. So
Well, I'm recommending both of them right
thanks.
now, and they're
112
actually a good combo
Yeah.
film. You could watch in either order.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't tend to think of them as connected in quite that way, but you're right. I mean, thinking back on it, what you said about my parents' marriage, you're right. There wasn't any worse than most marriages. In fact, in many ways was better than most. And yet they were deeply unhappy in some ways. So it just points out some of the complexity of marriage and long-term relationships, which is something, I'm looking into in the film I'm making now. It's just something, in part, it's why I drifted and was so fascinated by this kind of unintentional career I bumbled into of doing wedding videos, of being a wedding videographer. I mean, it was completely accidental, as, by the way, was starting the D Word. So much of, as was making 51 Birch Street. I mean, when I look back on it, so much of what I've done professionally has been, luck, coincidence, just whimsical.
How is it that you had all those tapes from 100? That you even had the tapes was amazing.
From which
to
film?
me. From the 112 weddings.
Well, like, I shot their weddings. That's
I know,
how I
but
did.
it's like some of the weddings were 15 years ago. And
Well,
so
I saved them, Chuck. I don't
Well,
throw
that's
out the wedding
obvious, but
tapes.
I'm still sort of amazed that you could find all those weddings and transfer them, and they looked so good.
Well, we spent a good amount of money, of HBO's money, up-resing them as best we could.
Where were they up-resed? Just can you say? Do
it
you
was
remember?
at a place called Glue, which I'm not sure is still in business as Glue. I think the
Blue
the color
or Glue?
Glue. The colorist
Glue.
we worked with, Steve Pequeno, retired, and his partner I think moved on to a different company. I'm not sure, but they were great. Yeah, I mean, the thing about shooting on older formats and shooting the way I do, which is as a single person crew, where I do my own sound and shooting and lighting, and I get the coffee and everything, is I wanted to look as good and sound as good as possible. So we spent a lot of care and attention and as much as we can afford on post production, and so that when you see it like you did, many years later, it looks and sounds great. 112 Weddings, by the way, isn't that old. It's like 2014 or 15. So
Well, but I'm saying I watched it, I'm sure, when it first came out, but I was able to sit down and watch it, and it was fresh for me. I don't know, maybe because it worked. It works.
Well,
on
it's a
many
really
levels.
interesting concept for those who don't know what it's about. For what over 20 years, I've been shooting weddings as a kind of side business to my documentaries. It's, I don't put a lot of effort into it. A lot of it was word of mouth. I only wanted to shoot like 6, 7, 8 weddings a year, so it didn't, overwhelm my documentary work. But I did it for a long time, and I accumulated, 112 actually plus weddings. And I long thought about going back. I mean, everybody thinks when you go to a wedding, like, what became of that couple?
Sometimes when I think he's the biggest jerk in the world, and then he'll do something funny, and I'll laugh, and I'll think to myself, oh, that's why I married him.
This is a film about the mystery of marriage.
How are their marriages doing? It's so that's what I did. I went back. I kind of thought, who would be interesting to talk to? I started compiling a list, and so the premise of the film is, I revisit 8 of my favorite couples to see how their marriages are doing. And then as I'm doing that, I'm following my latest couple who are about to get married. And you see their progress as they get closer and closer to the date, and ultimately it ends with their wedding. You're in such a position of power when you're editing, and you really have to take great care with your participants in the film to treat them fairly. And so, my rule of thumb is you can never make a joke at their expense. They can make a joke at their own expense, or they can put their foot in their mouths, and there's a way to communicate your own feelings about the relationship, or and yet be fair.
Was there any conversation with attorneys, HBO, about people in the background at weddings that you undoubtedly had no release from?
No, none. I've gotten a little bit, I don't know what the term is, laissez-faire about background people in shots. In my first film, I was like, I crossed, dotted every I and crossed every T. And as I went on, I realized, there's, nobody in the background of a documentary, God bless them if they even see the documentary, spot themselves in the background, track down who this filmmaker was, and like threaten to sue them because they didn't sign a release to be in the background of a shot. So you lawyers out there, you're not, I didn't say that, but
What's your next film?
the current one, it's called Betty and Henri, and it's about what happens when I discover what appears to be a decades-old love letter that was tucked away in a used travel book I owned. And with only their first names, Betty and Henri, involved.
Did you find? You don't have to tell me, but
I found couples that are even better. I found love stories that are even better. is how I'll
You
put it.
are
I can't,
you are the love master, right?
you won't believe what I found. But, you know, in many ways, it is about my own marriage. You know, I mean, I've never gone into my own marriage. And the kids grow up. It's about my daughter and following my daughter over her last year at home before she went off to college. And
In theory, this episode was supposed to be about the D word, and we were going to touch on your films. But I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to talk about your films because you are a wonderful documentary filmmaker, and even if you didn't have the D word, I think this would be a terrific episode, and I would encourage people to look up your films and
which they can
watch them
easily
wherever they-
do at DougBlock.com. How easy is that?
So, how many people are on the D word, and how often do they use it, and what are some of the statistics that
Okay.
we should know about the D word?
Well, it's always been free. We've never advertised or promoted in any way. This is like maybe the third or fourth interview I've done about it in the 23 years of its existence. And only because you asked me, Chuck. So people, I don't know, we started it in '99 when I was making Homepage, to circle back to how it began. When I created this homepage with this guy, Justin Hall, he was writing a very, very personal online diary of his life, including his quite active sex life, and being a 20-year-old and quite a charming one and handsome one at that. It was very active, and I decided right off the bat I do not want to write about my wonderful sex life on an online forum. So I decided documentary filmmakers would be like a perfect online community, and so anyway, I decided to write about the making of this film, Homepage, and for 3 years it was a blog. I wrote every 2 weeks or so. I would write a very long blog post about the process of making the film. So it was one of the first, I guess I was one of the first filmmakers stupid enough to write about the making of their film while they're making it.
And how do you support it? I read in this one story that at one point you raised $20,000.
The last year in '99, when Homepage actually came out and we were seeking theatrical distribution, it was going to be playing on HBO. We're dealing with distributors and distribution, and I felt like it was really important to be very open and transparent and candid in my blog posts. And once I got to the distribution phase, it became increasingly difficult to do that. I did not want to call out some of the lying liars and thieves and other companies and individuals who prey on the documentary filmmaker. And I was getting tired of being on a soapbox talking about it anyway. It was exhausting. I was exhausted. It was the end of the filmmaking process, and I just was ready to let go of this blog when I got into conversation with a friend who was into virtual communities. And I said, documentary filmmakers would be the perfect, online community. They're generous, they share their information, and we're also, like, we work in isolation. It's very lonely working on documentaries. I mean, if you get funding, you can build a team for a while, but then they go away, and you, once the editing is over, you're I mean, if you've been lucky enough to been able to hire people and stuff, they go off, and there you are on your own again. And I realized if I felt that way living in New York City, where there actually were places where we could meet occasionally, how hard is it for people who live outside of a huge city or and so we started it. The next day we were online. He knew a way to a person to host it, and we were off and running, and people just found it. They just found it. For the longest time, we didn't know how they found it, and then after a number of years, we on the registration form we put in a field saying, "How did you learn about the D word?" Most, at least 50% say through a friend or colleague, and we probably get upwards of 10 to 15 new registrations a day from all over the world. We now have over 23,000 members from 157 countries. And they just keep coming. So it's great. It's still free. We still don't advertise. We now have pivoted since the pandemic started from being an online platform where, the discussion topics were all sort of, you get on your computer and you type and you post. But since it'll be almost 3 years exactly in another week since we started hosting weekly Zooms every Friday. We do a Zoom, what we call a Zoom face-to-face with our members, where we alternate between doing very informal things where we all gather, usually somewhere between 50 and 75 people come. And we go into breakout rooms and we just kind of talk about what's going on with our lives and with our projects and try and help each other move their work forward with some kind, whatever advice or help or support they need. And then like I said, we alternate that with more focused face-to-faces on specific topics, where we bring in guest experts, and I moderate a conversation for half of it, and the other half is open to questions from the members. We're launching this major initiative called Documentality that I hope people will go to. It's just documentality.org, and it is focused on the mental health challenges that we face in this profession, which are profound and under-recognized. And, it's a really, really challenging film. And I say that with the caveat that nobody has put a gun to our heads and said, you have to be a documentary filmmaker. But we deal with multiple stresses, from one being in a pretty unsustainable profession to begin with. But with the pandemic and with the shrinking number of distribution outlets, other than major, streaming platforms that are looking for a very specific type of documentary that many of us don't make or can't afford to make. Funding that's very competitive. But also, it's underestimated how traumatic it is to work, that certain stories are done under very traumatic circumstances, both for the filmmakers, the crew, and the participants in the film. And so we're trying to just increase the importance of that in the field, and we have various approaches that we're taking to that, and getting more and more visibility within the industry.
Well, Doug Block, I want to say thank you so much for doing this interview.
So,
thank you so much.
you're quite welcome. It was a pleasure.